here in front of me, I've got your book. I've got
Yeah.
the email you sent me the other day. I've got your Life Games manual. And for the first 10 minutes, let's let it be very emergent and very, focused on the central themes of mindfulness, processing, present moment, create. And then from there, I'll guide to focus on specific things from the book, from this, that, and the other thing. Before we dive into that, Tom, I'm curious in your point of view, how does therapeutic tools and modalities fit into leadership or into your view of building frameworks? We're going to dive into one great approach to that today, but I'm curious how you compartmentalize the importance of therapeutic tools.
Well, maybe two ways. One is that I'd like to think that our interaction with each other is generative, is therapeutic, at least in small ways. Maybe not in an intense way to transform or to change our self-experience, our emotional experience, but over time it should be. And we run into humans all the time, and they're having a inner experience that I think we want to appreciate and respond to. That's the one side. The other side is what is our own selves that we bring, what we're open to and what we're willing to step towards in the world that we're in with the people that we're with is, I think, either limited or enabled by our own inner experience, self-experience. And so that's how I see the relationship of,
Right.
therapy or
What
personal
what we can
transformation.
what we're able to create in our leadership, wherever that is in some sense limited by or defined by who we are and how we are. Is that right, Tom? Is that what you're
I
saying?
think so, yes.
I
Yeah.
agree with that. Who buys into that idea? That the vert okay, amazing. So what we're gonna dive in today is a approach to really therapy, a therapeutic approach that I've experienced with Rolf and that I've also read his book about, which I encourage everybody to read. Tom, you can hold it up. You've got a copy. Rolf, you've got a copy. The book is called Deep Clearing. And I'm really here because I'm curious to just learn from Ralph himself and give him the floor, give you the floor, Ralph, to speak on things from your wealth of experience. But I want to tee up a few concepts. This idea, Ralph, that unprocessed past experiences, right? The way you put it,
Mhm.
that they can often hold our attention captive. Tell us about this idea of unprocessed past experiences and how and that's relationship to our attention. Let's start with that, Ralph.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me, first of all, Jared and Tom. And about holding attention and so on, we see very much the what we call the repressed mind is as a collection of all these bad things that has happened to us that we haven't quite processed yet. And it tends to bind attention units, as we call it, into this repressed mind. And by then working through all these experiences in session, that is, we release these attention units. We finish some unfinished business, you could say, by processing these experiences, whether it is emotions or it's experiences in general, what happened to us, and how are we gonna deal with it. And that's how we process through these things. And it can be one simple approach that is not a patented approach by any means, but one simple approach is simply to find traumatic or incidents, stressful incidents that has has overwhelmed us to some degree, and then go through them in session and find all the emotions and the feelings, the impulses and the thoughts, all this subjective content there is in the incidents, and then really run it out. We see very much, for instance, if you have an emotional experience, say you have the loss of a loved one, and you're not really maybe allowed to grieve what is healthy, if you will. So very often we suppress what's really is going on to put up a good facade. And that means that we kind of compress the things and it's unreleased. We talk about this cycle of experience that is stopped. And by contacting this experience in the memory, both the analytical memory, but also the emotional memory and that various levels of memory that has to be contacted, we can we can convert this experience, this traumatic experience, to life experience. That's our kind of motto we go with, that we can convert stress and impact of trauma and so on to life experience. And that's really how it goes.
What I appreciate the most about Rolf's approach to, therapeutic work is how refined and focused the approach that you have is. And what I mean by this is, when you read your book, Rolf, you speak about what you just said in such clear-cut detail. And I want to go into some of those points now because in your book, you separate this whole idea of essentially processing, traumas from the past. And I think that's an idea that a lot of people are familiar with on some level. But what I notice is that people's question is like, well, how do you do that? Right? Or like, it might be expressed as something that people should do, but it's not as clear. But what you have is really this way of breaking it down into a lot of component pieces, right? So you break it down into really the objective side of like what the story is, and you focus a lot on getting people to really get the story straight. And you even say in your book that sometimes you can have them retell you the story a handful of times until a certain point. What are you looking for when you're having people tell you the objective facts of their story? What's the point at which then and now it's okay to process it? And then we'll go into how to do that.
Yeah, let me first say it kind of falls in two clear categories. First, you do the debriefing, if you will, like if it was a police incident or an accident, the police would get all the details. And that's the objective side. And then we go into the subjective side, the emotions, all the reactions that happens in the individual person. It can be the spectator as the one who looks upon the accident, or it can be somebody who was in the accident, the perpetrator, the victim, whatever. So when we talk about recounting the actual incident, we simply ask the person to go to the beginning and then go through the incident to the end. And this can happen at least 2 times, usually more, because the story keeps changing a bit, and you can see the person is still agitated in telling it. And that's the charge we want to get off the incident, the agitation, the engagement, and so on. But very soon, you will hear the same version again. And I mean, you can catch it in one repeat, or you can maybe have to wait a couple of repeats. And when you hear it's the same story, nothing is changing, the person is kind of bored with it, then it's time to move on to the subjective side. And then we move into finding the emotions. We find the impacts and the impulses as all the action in it. You can have the person reenact what happened. If it's a car accident, you'll be kind of thrown this way and that way. And very important is the thought content. And that can be as a very simple things like, oh, I'm hurt, right? And you may think, well, so what? Everybody can see I'm hurt. But it's like this statement in your mind will hold the whole incident in place. And there can be more tricky statements like, I'll never be able to walk again or something. And that can be a very kind of debilitating statement because the person may just, reenact it in life. But simple statements like I'm hurt is also worth getting out of in the recount because it tends to hold the incident in place.
Right. So basically, I mean, it seems so simple and to some degree, I don't want to say obvious, but very helpful. And I don't see a lot of practitioners doing this because I think that a lot of practitioners, they blend both, if that makes sense. Because in discussing your life with them, a practitioner, I'm not saying all, but a lot of times will the objective and the subjective will be very just blended together, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So what benefits have you noticed by separating them this way, Ralph, of getting, of sort of getting the story very clear objectively before then, having someone confront more of the internal sides of it, and then we'll talk about, how you divide that up. But first, what benefits have you noticed by dividing it that way in your sessions that you guide
Yeah,
people?
let me first say one thing, and that is we go by the rules of clearing, a set of rules that are very important. And that is, we find that's a very essential part of what we're doing because I see many other practices where they don't have these rules and they kind of mix things together, in my opinion. And the thing is that if you want to get the subjective side and the objective side, and you may be you may be tempted to give advice and why didn't you do this, that, and the other thing, while we are very strict in staying in a Socratic mode, where we ask questions, we listen, we direct, we control the session, you could say. But we don't give advice. We don't comment. We don't comment like, why in hell did you do that? You must admit that was stupid. And maybe it was, but the whole thing is to get the person to feel so safe so he can put it all on the table and then take it apart.
Right.
Right. And it's just natural to start with the objective side, have the person tell it again and again. And in some modalities, like I'm trained in something called traumatic incident reduction, there we just run the incident again and again in the simple form. And it works, but it takes an awful lot of time and you don't go as deep. But, the first couple of runs can be very productive. But at some point, it starts to grind, as we call it. It starts to produce nothing, just repetition. And then there are still layers underneath there, like emotional layers and so on. It's very productive to contact. And
Got it. So
yeah.
It's interesting that you brought up it in the context of, providing safety to the client, because in your book, you talk about how some people are more thought-based or emotion-based or action-based. There might have been another one in there. Um, do people ever find it to be less? Because in other words, I'm anticipating that for some people, if you tell them, hey, let's get the story straight before we go into the subjective emotional side, for some people, does that ever create the opposite experience where they really want to feel safe by telling the emotions first? Does that ever happen?
No, we just put them and have them sit down in the chair and we ask what happened, right?
Okay, fantastic. So then
Basically,
let's talk about the way that you break down the different bandwidths of subjective experience. You talk about these different deep elements,
yeah,
and can you walk us through that now as far as,
yeah,
given someone looking at a past incident that holds weight for them, traumatically speaking, what are some of the different bandwidths that we are able to find when we look inside of that?
right. These are the different layers of the subjective experience I'm sure you're referring to.
Exactly.
And so I can explain what DEEP is an acronym. And D, it stands for decision or dictates, and that's a thought thing. It's a well-known model, thought, emotion, heart, as a head, heart, and hand for that matter. But we have deep, D stands for decision or dictate. So it can be causative decisions, or it can be, later on, it can be dictates from the repressed mind that kind of dominates. Then we have the first E, that's emotions. Uh, and that's self-explanatory. There are all kinds of emotions in a traumatic incident or stressful situation. Then the second E is energies, and it can be simply action and so on. But there are a lot of energies that actually can be contacted when the person is ready, and it's all kinds of energies going on around the person. And this is, for a researcher like me, it's very fascinating, but maybe for some people it's just silly. So we'll have to apply it to those who actually enjoy that and can get benefit from it. Then we have the
What,
P. Yeah,
sorry, go on to P and then say more about what you were saying before. Go ahead.
yeah. The P, we originally it meant polarities because we were handling very much, clashes between people. But now we more call it like perspectives. And the thing is, you can take one thing that few modalities have is running the different perspective. We run the perspective of the victim and also the perpetrator. And how do we do that? We simply tell the client to take the viewpoint of the perpetrator and go through the incident in detail. And with this has to be done with some sensitivity, of course. But in the best of cases, it really runs like you wouldn't believe it, the amount of details you can get. And it's the perfect resolution of the incident. In the criminal system, what they find is the most beneficial to the victims is if they can meet the perpetrator later and just say, why did you do that? And all that kind of things. And so we don't have the luxury of having the perpetrator there, but we can have the client take the viewpoint of the perpetrator. And this resolves a lot of things. It gives a new perspective of what forgiveness is, you could say, because if you can see it from all sides, suddenly you know, it's a totally different experience subjectively.
Yeah, absolutely. So just going through those again, the D in deep for deep clearing, Rolf's book, D stands for decisions, and you called it, you know, that's the thought layer. I've heard that another practitioner refer that as sponsoring thoughts. What I take that to mean, Rolf, but see if you can clarify this. There are certain thoughts that we have which really shape our entire worldview or identity. Can you talk
Yeah.
about that? Let's go tell us about the thought layer and what's in there when it comes to reviewing these important moments in life. Like what's in the thought layer that we want to pay attention to?
Yeah, then there can be a lot of things. As I mean, what we hit first of all is these involuntary remark. You say, "Shit, I'm gonna die," or whatever. And getting those out of the way means that the person kind of takes some blocks away from just healing up. And so you can find some of these very kind of destructive thoughts that get stuck in the repressed mind. But of course, it's also this is coming up more in other types of processing and facilitation we do. But you can get all kinds of self-limiting thoughts, which is a well-known subject in many up-to-date modalities and therapies. And I can say so much that I studied also acceptance and commitment therapy, and they have a very good grip on this with thought content.
Well, I guess what I'm trying to get your take on is, you know, in a lot of trying to remember the name of this modality, but just, you know, psychotherapy generally, there's this idea of, you know, unconscious decisions where like in a moment, in a shock moment, a traumatic incident, a negative experience, a
Yeah.
certain part of somebody's mind will make a decision
Mm.
about how the world is and about how they are that then becomes a sponsoring thought. In other words,
Yeah, it's a
that
dominating thought.
decision
Yeah,
sponsors all kinds of other, you know, a chain reaction, you could say.
right. Yes, that's quite routine, and it's kind of really dig in and find gold there if the person says something like that comes up.
Right. Like in other words, they're like, okay, when such and such happened, oh yeah, I realized I made a conclusion at that point to do this or to, you know, I is that, you know, I like how you said like, you know, oh, I'm gonna die. That's like an involuntary remark. Is there a certain like syntax even that you find people having those types of you know,
Well,
decisions
I mean, I
that
had a
shape their whole life about it? Does that make sense? Because I think that finding those can be so helpful. I'm just wondering if there's anything that you found about how those tend to show up for people.
absolutely, and I usually call that you have to catch fish with your bare hands, you see, because you get this statement coming out of the of nowhere. I see, I'm no good, and the client didn't hear it himself, and he kind of was just swimming by like a fish. But I take my bare hands and I grip it, you know, take a good grip there, and that's really catching something.
Right.
I mean,
So
I had a client here very recently. He had this thing going on with I'm no good and so on, and he went back to his school days, and there were some, you know, incidents in the schoolyard, what do you call it, bullying incidents and so on, that we ran out. And there's a lot of pain and suffering connected to these incidents that kind of, we have all this pain connected to them, which makes them hard for the client to kind of confront and see, to witness, because because they're painful. We don't like to go into painful things, of course. That's just human nature.
Right.
And but I mean, that's part of my job as a therapist, is to get people safely into these part of their past, and really get the pain out of the incident, and then we can discharge these dictates as well. We
Got it.
call them dictates because, as I mean, maybe they were kind of conceived under certain circumstances, but later on they work like dictate, they dictate behavior and so on.
Right.
And you had another name for them from another modality, and that's fine. They're used in many different modalities for sure.
Right. Well, basically that I call it sponsoring thought. Like that
Sponsoring thoughts, yeah.
someone might come in with some type of situation that's occurring, in their life now, and
Mhm.
they, through, conversation and in this way, will come to discover that a certain thought that they have on a very deep unconscious level is sponsoring, nearly all of what's happening. And it's a thought that has to do with, just like you said, I'm no good, like I'm not okay, like I can't, some kind of thought like that, um that would sponsor all this. So in terms of the emotions, what's something unique or insightful that you focus on when unpackaging the emotional bandwidth for folks when it comes to the therapeutic work that you do?
Yeah, you could say we use a lot of repeating, have the person feel repeatedly the emotion, and it can be compared to mindfulness practices,
Mm.
and this is very popular in modern therapies to include this mindfulness approach. So we have the person really kind of go into that feeling and just observe it. The important part is he's not being the emotion, because then he's not getting out of it. He has to observe it in a mindfulness manner and let it kind of flow out. The amazing thing is that one of the simplest techniques we use is just say, feel that anger. Let's use that as an example. And he says, yes. And again, we say, feel that anger. And he says, yes. And we do that sometimes 10 times or so. And then we check it at the beginning. How strong is it on a scale from 0 to 10? And he says, oh, it's a 10. I'm really, I'm really pumped here of anger. And then just by letting it, repeating it like that, we can get it down to near 0. And what's happening is it's an energy, it's an energy that is kind of become solid, just like the good Einstein said, E equals mc squared. As I mean, solidity can become energy, right? So by taking it up as and just doing this repeating, it becomes an energy that can flow, and then it flows to release, if you will. Just like if you had an electrical circuit, you just get the connection, and then the particles, the electrons or whatever, they flow, and at some point it's done.
You
And
said something really incredibly interesting here. I think that you're basically saying that the energy of anger has become solid for somebody,
yeah,
and by bringing attention to it in a mindful way, that you're simply saying can be done just by saying, do you feel that anger? And having them say yes, and having
yeah,
that happen a few times, that makes it translate from solid back to energy. And That's what you want.
That's a perfect understanding there. Yes, we have more sophisticated techniques than just saying feel that anger. But I mean, for this purpose here, we used that for a long time, for years actually, and now we have gotten on to more sophisticated techniques. But basically, that's what we do. Correct.
And then why is that important though? Why do you want to translate the anger from solid to energy? Why is that important?
Yeah, that's the whole thing, that there's a tension, there's life force tied up in these incidents, in the anger as such. And when we release it through these techniques, the person gets some of this elan vital back, you know, this life force. And that's what the whole thing is about, to revitalize a person in his daily life. And that's, as you put it, it's a very good way of explaining it.
Okay, we went over decisions, which is thought, emotions, which we cover as essentially, energy that's meant to move in some way, but that can become, I love how you just said it, you know, emotions that are not able to move as energy can become a life force that's tied up. And it's more like a solid than like an energy. But fascinating how you connect that with attention. Can you just talk for a second about, how attention units, like just talk about attention units as life force and how those relate to emotion?
Absolutely. We have a whole chapter about attention and intention. These are two kind of similar things. The one is more outbound, the intention, of course, and attention is inbound, like listening and talking, if you will. But yeah, we see attention units. We see kind of, to make it simple, we say a person has so many attention units. I don't know exactly how many, but let's say he has 1,000, and then you can very well get the client in a state where 500 of those are tied up in his repressed mind. And the thing is to convert this repressed mind. Let's say it's simple. It's a solid. It's kind of a thing sitting in the middle of his head, perhaps. And we want to make it liquid first, and then get it to evaporate. One thing that is interesting about attention and what is it? Can you quantify it? And yes, in a way you can, because if you compare attention unit with simply with money, you can find a lot of parallels there. That you can do things with money, and you can have so many of them, and you can release them and all that. So there's a interesting parallel. I mean, it's not one-to-one, but it's at least the best I can come up with quantifying it.
Rolf, are you studied at all in terms of Gestalt psychology, Gestalt therapy, like Fritz Perls and those folks?
Yeah, Fritz Perls, yeah, a bit, yeah.
Is there, I notice, connection with what you're talking about, with, you mentioned cycle of experience, basically this premise of there is a kind of, somewhat animalistic, normal biological mechanism of energy moving within and without a person, attention and intention. But that what essentially is happening in therapeutic process is addressing places where there is a neurotic, like, inability for that cycle to be experienced and to be completed.
Mhm.
And I think it's I don't know why, but it's extremely interesting to me to bring the language of attention into that. But for right now, let's move on to efforts and polarity. So we've covered thought and emotion.
I would like to say a little more on attention intention,
Amazing.
because it's a cornerstone in the sense that these are life qualities, right? This is not something a machine can reproduce by any means. I have recently studied artificial intelligence and all that kind of jazz there. And what you see people do on the net is a fight, and they put on big stories and they put on this, that, and the other thing on the net. And it's all a matter of gaining attention. That's
Mhm.
kind of the goal, you see. You cannot just um, buy as a, that's really the goal that and the artificial intelligence with all the good things it can produce and so on. There's still no attention, there's no intention, it's just a machine running.
Right. So that's why attention is life force.
Yeah, it's very close.
Interesting. Well, I guess just to stay on this for one moment longer, um, you know, because you talk about artificial intelligence, and in these days, you hear about, attention in that framework that you just talked about getting people's attention and people's attention not being focused or productive. And it's a very like modern, secular conversation of like the economy and where's that's what I think of in terms of attention. And you don't hear life force as much connected in that space. And you don't hear does that make sense? Like it just feels like worlds colliding to put it that way. So, but it
Yeah,
makes
let me just complete the thought with money and attention. It is, if you can attract attention, you can also attract money, if you can attract it in a positive way. Uh, that there's a parallel. I mean, it's not one to one, but there's something going on there, right? And if you can put out intention, you can get the flow going and so on. So it's a prime mover. That's what I'm getting at.
let's complete the deep package here. Let's go from decision and emotion, covered that. We got some great insights out of there, some principal insights from there. Let's go over to efforts. Efforts, you had even a little caveat when you were describing it at first. You said, maybe it's a nuance or something, but my understanding of efforts that I want to hear you break it down is it's the physical side.
Yeah, that was kind of a difficult one because there's different kinds of effort, right? But we have these well-known age-old models of man with it's the head, it's the heart, and it's the hand, or it's mind, heart, body, and so on. So effort is very much action. It's a physical side. It's a body side. So it's a few things. But when we take it up in clearing work and so on, we have the person kind of imitate the impulses that went through him at the traumatic situation, say a car accident. He would have all kinds of physical reactions and movements and so on. And the person can sit in the chair, as we do it kind of just sitting across from each other, like here, but often via the internet. But we have the person go through the impulses that went into that action. And it's just like we explain it like if you have see a high jumper, for instance, in a sports competition, he will stand there before he starts his jump, and he will go through all the motions in his mind. And that is actually what we ask people to do, and in that manner they can resolve the stuck impulses and efforts that's sitting in the body. And the strange thing is you can actually recall all these motions very clearly in many cases. Exactly what how the movement went, and even I talked about running the other viewpoint, as the transgressor's viewpoint, for instance, and you can even recall all the movements that the other person did.
Interesting. So you connect that again to the athlete. You're talking about like visualization of the actions, like sort of
Yeah, visualization, and you see the athlete will move his
right.
limbs because he's going through the, yeah, I'll do like this here,
Okay.
and what have you.
And then what about counter efforts?
Yeah, that's comes into it very quickly, and that would be the other person usually, right? If you have an accident, but it can also be of course, let's say you have, let's just take the example with the high jumper, and he's not kind of at the top of his game. So you'll have to find what counter actions or impulses he has, right? And address those in the same way, have him kind of go through them. See, you see when you see a jumper like a pole jumper, I love to see watch athletes like that on the track and field. But you see that the pole jumper, he runs there with his big pole, and then quite a few times he changes his mind and he just runs straight past the jump, so to speak.
Right. So, I mean, and by the way, so for everyone, I put in the Zoom chat here a little screenshot from Rolf's book where this head, heart, hand piece is in. I mean, basically, what we're just talking about is bringing into a mindful witnessing experience all of the many and different subjective aspects that are involved in life experiences. Um, and you said, Rolf, that the guy changes his mind. Am I hearing you say that, kind of like you said for the example of anger. Do you feel anger? Yes. Do you feel anger? Yes, yes, yes. That it goes down, that by essentially bringing the person into a more embodied take of the efforts that are in a repressed format, unconscious, connected to that incident, connected to that story, that by the end of doing it, their movement changes, that they go from, like, what was that you just said about like the pole jumper will, by the end of it change his mind, how that relates to doing this
Yeah,
process.
he may have these impulses to not jump, as I mean, being scared just in the wrong moment or so, and then John run under the bar there. But so you can find in many cases you can find the exact moment where he kind of changes his mind, and it's very kind of repressed and not into his consciousness what's going on. But there can be a whole thing with a thought and of course the action, the impulse to not jump or effort, as we also call it. And then we can address that as an in the way of go through that effort and just observe yourself, be mindful about it, what's going on, and in that way the person can get a grip on it and delete it from his jumping.
Right. And you know, you mentioned before like not giving advice, and we spoke briefly, about Gestalt. Your approach, it seems, and correct me if I'm wrong, in your opinion, if you'd call it this, but it's a very phenomenological approach, right? It's not interpretive or analytical. In other words, someone might come to a therapist and say, I keep, talk about those types of things. But what you're talking about is instead of getting into the realm of, abstract theorizing or just discussing why something is, you're really just talking about bringing energy right back into the reality of now and moving from one state to another.
Right, that's a very important point you bring up there. Very important because you'll find like in early therapies like Freud's psychotherapy and so on, there will be a lot of discussion of things and why do you think you do that and so on. We are kind of we are really on working like we want to get the original recordings, We're like archaeologists, you could say. We dig down until we find the real gold there, and that's the recordings, what happened in certain incidents, and then we work on that, just making it mindful to the client, and when it's in the consciousness and been given all this consciousness, the client can change his or her mind about it, and that's usually the end of it. And we talk a lot about running incidents, but of course we have other techniques where we just can take a subject. I usually use the sphere of cats, and then we have all kinds of questions, and we just let the client talk. And at some point, it will reveal these incidents or these emotions and thoughts and so on. And then we can take it up without necessarily finding a traumatic incident.
You, as a counselor, you are listening into not only what incidents from the past may be relevant to bring under a more mindful witnessing. What do you usually need from your clients to know what is the process of that you go through to determine in your own understanding what experiments to do with somebody? And then how do you introduce those to them?
Yeah, these days we have a lot of clients on via Zoom or Skype, and so you don't sit down with them and have a long intake interview and so on. It's different times, and so usually I would just ask. I have very polite question, but I basically ask, "What's up?" And they say, "Oh, I'm afraid of cats." Right? Okay. So we have an entry point there. And so we usually just have one thing that there's the main complaint. And then I'll do this deep subject clearing on that. And that's just asking questions and revealing situations and emotions and thoughts and all that. And we can take up these emotions, thoughts, and impulses and so on right there and then. Without going into what happened when he was 5 years old and all that, because it's not always available. It gives a great entrance without too much waste of time. And it will reveal under other things like traumatic incidents that really were serious in the person's life and other things like that.
Got it. Okay, so let's complete the deep and then we'll continue on some of these interesting topics. So we covered decisions, emotions, efforts. These are all things that when you are doing what you just said of, someone, I'm afraid of cats. Okay, well, let's not analyze why, like Freudian.
Yeah.
Let's be here and now. Let's talk about polarities and perspectives. that people find within themselves when they do this type of mindful witnessing type of work?
Yeah, this is a very kind of groundbreaking thing. I mean, there are other modalities that have it, but it's very few because we really want to get the different perspectives into it. And that can be the opponent parts. It can be, you can even take spectators and so on. You take a lot of viewpoints that were present there, or and run the incident, for instance, from that point of view. And it's just amazing how many details are present. And it kind of, I'm not, a deeply religious man. I call myself Christian, and I'm happy about that. But it kind of gives uh, this Eastern theory about we are all one it comes into play, because it's just amazing that you can see it all from a different perspective, and it seems so real. But I mean, I'm just putting this out because I've been kind of surprised time and time again when I've seen it in session with amazing details and so on.